Hello, dairy production students. For this lecture, we're going to talk about precision dairy monitoring technologies. Some of you may be a little familiar with them, and some of you, this may be a totally new. So let's first talk about what is dairy monitoring. And so precision dairy monitoring is the use of technologies to measure physiological, behavioral, and production indicators on individual animals to improve management strategies and farm performance. So basically what that is we have a cow here, her number is 568, and she is wearing a technology. And let's just go with her left ear, so that orange tag that's called Cow Manager. So that technology is continuously downloading and recording her data and then transferring it to a computer. Let's say we're going to measure activity here for heat detection. And so she is just a normal cow. She has a normal level of activity, and then one day all of a sudden her level of activity spikes 30% above what the last 10 days average activity has been. And when that happens, that computer alerts the software, it pops up an alert and says, hey, 568 is in heat. And then from there, the farmer can breed her. Now that's basically the base of the technology. What would be ideal in the future is if that computer integrated with other different types of software, like management software, where it said, okay, yes, 21 days ago, this cow was bred, she didn't settle, and so she needs to be bred again. Or it could say, you know what, she was bred 8 days ago, and for some reason, this software, she has an increase in activity, but it's not because she's in heat, and it doesn't tell the producer she's in heat. Or it could combine economic data and say, you know what, this is the 5th time that we've bred this cow, this lactation, and she's getting older. We don't need to breed her and put her on a cull list. So right now, precision technologies are just telling the farmer that the cow is in heat, but in the future, it would be really nice if we could integrate a lot more information and help producers make individual decisions on individual cows. So precision technology basically comes down to making decisions. And so if we look at how producers make decisions currently, this was a study done in Kentucky 7 years ago. And producers are consulting business partners. They're taking advice from consultants. They're use their intuition or gut feeling, consulting with neighboring farms, or end-of-year efforts to avoid paying taxes. So a few of those, like taking advice from consultants, is great, but none of the ways that producers are making decisions is really data-driven. And especially when we're looking at producers that are, say that they're using their intuition or gut feeling to make decisions, is not always the best sound advice for a producer to make decisions. They also are taking advice from extension and formal calculations to evaluate financial impact. That's really great. Employee input, formal decision-making techniques, which is great. They're getting information from conferences and trade shows and internet resources. So now let's look at some areas that we can monitor within or on the cow. So this is 568. So we can measure feed intake, methane output, where the cow is located in the barn, her body temperature, how much she weighs, how fat or thin she is, when she's going to calve, how many times she's ruminating for the day, her rumen pH, if she has mastitis, what her milk components are, animal mobility, her hoof health and gait, lying and standing behavior, activity. So lots of different areas that we can measure on the cows. And so let's go through some of the systems. I'm not going to go through all of the existing systems. There's way too many on the market right now. So we're just going to go through and give you examples of technology so you know what they look like. So First one, let's talk about feed intake. And so that would be in the cow's left ear, there's an orange tag there called Cow Manager that can measure feed intake. And so it's not truly measuring dry matter intake, it's actually measuring how many hours per day the cow is eating. And so that's going to be very different than actually true dry matter intake, but we can still use that information to make some nutrition decisions for cows. Next is methane. This is green feed. This is the only piece of a technology on the market that measures methane. So cows will come to this system and they will eat a little pellet, and as they're doing that, they're eructating every 45 seconds roughly, and so they are measuring methane out from cows. Animal location, this is the white tag in the cow's right ear. There's lots of different reasons why we would want to measure animal location. On really large farms, it's easy to find cows, but beyond that, looking at evaluating the cow's behavior is really a really great way to use technology. And so this is a picture of a barn, and all those green dots are cows. And so you can really see where the cows are located. So the straight line here is the feed bunk, and then all of these little squares are the free stalls. And then the milking parlor is right here. And so we can really see if the cows are lying down, if they're up eating, like that. Body temperature, great way to see if cows have a temperature. Now, the way that this temperature system works is it's a rumen bolus that you give to the cow, just like you would be giving a big pill with like a pill gun. However, water intake can really disrupt the temperature readings. And so while this is awesome, it's not always the most reliable source of information for body temperature. We can measure body weight. When it comes to cattle, body condition scoring, or when it comes to dairy cattle, body condition scoring is definitely a better way to evaluate what their body stores look like, but we can still measure things like body weight. DeLaval has a system that measures their fatness or thinness, and so a cow walks under this camera as they're leaving the milk parlor, and it's the same. If anyone plays Xbox, it's the exact same Microsoft Kinect camera that's in your Xbox is in this DeLaval body condition scoring system, and so it measures literally how fat or thin cows are. This system, I don't actually think this system is being sold at the moment. This Madria can tell us when cows are going to calve, and so these spider-looking things, you will insert them vaginally about 10 days before a cow is going to calve, and then that bolus will link to your cell phone, and you can link it to a cow's number. So let's say we had cow 1500 and we put in bolus 1. When cows get ready to calve, 24 to 36 hours before they calve, they have a drop in their body temperature, and it's pretty big. It's like a degree to a degree and a half when we're talking about Celsius drop of body temperature. And so that will alert the producer that says, hey, these cows, this cow 1500 had a drop in her body temperature. She's probably going to calve soon. Move her into a calving pen. And then when the fetus expels the bolus, it'll say, hey, cow 1500 is actually calving. There's other calving systems. There's one called Mukal that just sits on the tail and watches and measures like the tail activity. So we can measure as well. As rumination, the collar that is around the cow, that's the SCR collar. You all have seen that collar. We have that at the dairy. Measuring rumen pH, if we're trying to measure acidosis, so we'll give a cow this bolus just like you would give a big just like you would give a pill with a pill gun, and this will sit in the cow's room and it measure pH, so we can try to detect things like acidosis. However, with this system, after a few weeks, you have to look at drift, and so it's not a great technology. You can't use it multiple years. You can just use it for a few weeks. We can measure mastitis. There's lots of different ways to measure mastitis. This is CellSense out in New Zealand. It looks at the DNA of different pathogens, so it can alert you to an inline system. So as cows are milking in the parlor, their milk is going through this Affy milk to measure the milk component. There's mobility. So this Affy company has an Affy, it's called Affy Pedometer Plus, and that mobility is tracking how well cows are walking around. Same with this is called the Gatewise system, and this is literally measuring temporal and spatial of each hoof. And so what that means is that it measures how much pressure each hoof places on that mat, and then it measures out the different spacings between from like when the back right foot picked up until it lands back down. So it's really measuring truly how much pressure and how wide their stride. We can measure lying, standing time, overall activity, which is usually in number of steps. There's more systems out there. There's a new system that does facial recognition. It's not truly facial recognition, but that is the easiest way to explain it. And so we can measure a cow's facial recognition and see how long a cow is drinking and eating and lying down, things like that. Because what's really important about that is, if you remember back to all those systems, most of those were wearable technologies, meaning they're on every single cow. And if we have 4,000 cows in a herd, that is a lot of tags that we have to keep up with, that we have to put on to every cow, make sure they stay on every cow, make sure that they're working properly. So there's just a lot of logistics when we're talking about a wearable technology. So if we can use something like that new Cargill system that does that facial recognition and just have some cameras around the barn, that's a little bit easier than putting on 4,000 tags and keeping up with 4,000 tags. So let's look at how a lot of these record information, and it's with an accelerometer. So most of those technologies that I just described were wearable technologies, and a lot of the wearable technologies use an accelerometer. And so accelerometer is truly just a Fitbit. It's the same technology that's in your Fitbit that tracks activity. It's the same technology that's in your cell phone, that when you hold your cell phone horizontally or vertically and your screen changes, it's the exact same technology in there as well. So I talked in the very beginning about what actually a precision technology was. And I said that you can, she would have normal activity, and then if we're just talking about straight heat detection, she would have a spike in her activity. And so this is what this alert system would look like. So this is a screenshot of an alert from a technology. This is for cow 1332. And you can see she has a normal activity, and then all of a sudden on October 7th, she had an increase or between October 7th and October 8th, she started to have an increase. And you can see those diamonds, those say increase in activity, and then she's suspicious in heat. And then between October 8th and October 9th, she had a big spike in her activity. And so that green bar on the bottom that kind of fades into yellow, that is saying that when she's like actively in heat and needs to be bred. And this is an individual screenshot of an individual cow, but a lot of technologies will just have an alert system that will tell you the numbers of each cow that are suspect to be in heat and need to be bred for that day. And if we're looking at if we're thinking about our SCR heat detection system that we have in our dairy at the dairy center, the way that our system works is it's a collar, so it's measuring activity. So the alert system would look very much like this. However, instead of going down into the herd to find each individual cow, we have an automatic sort gate. So that means that when a cow is alerted that she's in heat, in the morning as she's leaving the parlor, when she passes by these little readers, and it would say, hey, let's say 1332 is in heat, a gate is going to open up in front of her, and it's going to put her into a different pen, so then our herd manager can truly look at her and say, yes, she's in heat, or no, for whatever reason, she was alerted she's in heat and she doesn't need to be. Let's talk about some of the benefits of dairy monitoring. So it can monitor individual animals. We all know, as we've talked through the class, that farms are getting much larger and there's becoming fewer cows. And so when we have those really large farms, it's really hard to monitor the individual animals. And so with all these technologies now, we can monitor individual animals. It also really increases efficiency. So I'm going to keep taking heat detection as our example. Back in the day, we would have to, visually assess cows for 30 minutes in the morning and afternoon for heat detection. Or as you saw on the repro lecture, we might have to chalk all of the individual cows' tails to see if they're in heat. And that just takes a lot of labor. And so if we can reduce that labor and we can just use the technology, that frees up that labor to go do something else. And when we're talking about a small farm where maybe they don't have a lot of laborers and they're the ones that are doing heat detection and bookkeeping and everything else, maybe now instead of watching cows for heat detection, they can go and use that time elsewhere in maybe things like bookkeeping, business management, or marking their milk, something that's more valuable. It also can reduce cost. So if we are able to use the collars to free up labor to go do something else, that can reduce costs there. If we're able to detect cows that are sick sooner, we can reduce costs in things like antibiotic use or veterinarians coming to our farm. There's lots of different ways that it can reduce costs. You'll see cost also on the pitfalls of the system, and I'll talk about that why. So it is though. It can also improve product quality. So we saw some of those technologies that measured things like mastitis and milk components. And so if we're able to detect cows that maybe have mastitis, we can treat them sooner and getting their quality of their milk increase, whether instead of just waiting for visual signs to occur. It also can minimize adverse environmental impacts. So we looked at the methane, right? We can measure methane and maybe feed cows a little bit differently if we're having a lot of methane output. Also, maybe not using as much antibiotics if we are treating cows, and so we can minimize the environmental impacts. This is definitely not the biggest benefit, but it is a small benefit, and I think we'll see more benefits as we continue to use technologies in the future. And it also improves animal health and well-being, right? So we're monitoring individual cows, we're making sure that they are ruminating properly and eating properly and making sure that they are just very healthy. And then last but not least, it improves farmer well-being. So it's a picture of my parents hanging out down at the river. So before, farmers worked 24/7. They weren't able to go to their kids' soccer games or really do a lot of fun things. They work constantly and they work so hard. But now if they can employ technology, especially when we're talking about milking robots, it really can change their life and change what they do throughout the day. Now, instead of, watching cows that are in heat, milking them 2 or 3 times a day, they can use technologies and robots to do a lot of their work for them, which is going to improve their life, improve the quality of life. Now let's talk about the areas of opportunity. So that's the downside, the pitfalls of precision monitoring. So we're trying to manage the physiology and the behavior of cows, but we really have a limited understanding of the physiology and the behavior of cows. Yes, we know a lot more than when my grandfather owned cows, but we still don't know a lot. And so we have a really limited understanding of the physiology and behavior, and we're trying to manage that of the cows. So that's a little difficult. It's also really expensive to adopt a technology. When we're talking about robots, we're talking about parlors, it's like $250,000. Technologies also vary from like $50 a tag to $250 a tag. And then buying the actual software piece is like $10,000. And so it's really can be cost prohibitive for some farms. When we're talking about a farm that has 4,000 cows, that's like $500,000 investment. And so it's really expensive. Just in general, precision livestock farming, which is the big umbrella that precision dairy monitoring falls under, it's just really complex because we're using statistics and algorithms and computers to really help us manage cows. And then all of a sudden we throw in animals, which adds a whole other complex aspect because animals do not read the textbook and they don't do what they're supposed to do all the time. And so it can be really, they can also be really intensive to manage. If you don't have one person that is just constantly managing that technology, it can really be a waste. So we're talking about the new video technology that's on the market that does the facial recognition. If we don't have that and we're using wearable technologies, very quickly it can become a huge pain in the butt and really difficult to manage because we have to make sure those technologies stay on the cows because they fall off, that they're always working because sometimes technology doesn't work. And very quickly it can kind of run amok. And if greater than 10%, this is just an anecdotal, we don't actually have data on this. If greater than 10% of your herd does not have working technology on them or has the wrong tag, it's supposed to be on another cow, that can really not be beneficial at all and can really be a total waste of using that technology. The technology has also been really slow to adopt by producers, mostly because they're unfamiliar or intimidated by technology, and we'll talk about a few other reasons why in a little bit. So when we look at something like the smartphone, right, every single one of you has a smartphone. My dad has a smartphone. Everybody has a smartphone. But we thought that the technology would take off more in the dairy industry, and it's been very slow to adopt. And then when talking about data usage, the data that is recorded on the farm by the technology, very little of that is actually used. So we really use less than 0.5% of data that is recorded. And that's just all data around the world. We do not evaluate all the data that we record every day throughout the entire world. And so when we're talking about it on the farm, we're doing the same thing. We're not using all of the data that we are recording, and it kind of becomes a waste. Also, a lot of the technologies are not integrated with other technologies on the farm. So in the very beginning, I was talking about integrating with a herd management software. Some of the technologies are starting to integrate. So the cow now, we know, she has an increase in her activity, but she was bred 21 days ago. So we know that she did not settle. If we could integrate that information from the herd management software instead of having a producer go look that information up, then that would be a lot easier. We also have problems still with technology not working. Just personally, when I was at the University of Kentucky, every time lightning struck our farm, which was all the time, our internet went out, and then it meant our technologies didn't work, and we had a raccoon problem. So I took that picture of that raccoon, and raccoons were constantly chewing through all of our Cat5 cable. And so it was a huge pain in the butt. And so we have to figure out how we can use technologies. What is our backup if something happens, like a raccoon chews through your cable? If this is the only way that you're doing heat detection, what's your backup? So I said that we were going to talk about why producers have by Borchers and Bewley. Also asked what behaviors of producers that actually do record data, what are they measuring currently? And so milk yield is number one. That's pretty much across the board. Cow activity, mastitis, milk components, standing estrus, feeding behavior, temperature, body weight, rumination, and rumen activity. And then followed by things like animal location all the way to rumen pH were less on the list. And then that same survey actually asked what producers find most difficult to measure. And so things like mastitis, standing heat, milk yield activity, and temperature were really important. And they thought methane emissions was their least important measurement that they should take on the farm. So when producers are trying to invest, what is a good way that they can know if the technology is a good investment? And that is the sensitivity and specificity. So sensitivity is the ability of the technology to correctly identify the event. And then specificity is the ability for the technology to correctly identify those without the event. And so the way that this works is, let's say a cow is in heat. So she has the condition. And let's say the technology says that, yes, she's in heat. That means that this cow was positive and she has the condition, so that means a true positive. But let's say the cow was not in heat, but the technology said that she was in heat, that would be a false positive. And then if the cow was in heat, but the technology said that she was not in heat, that's a false negative. And then if a cow was not in heat and the technology said that she was not in heat, then that should be true. Sorry. Then it would be a true. And so the way that works, let's say we had 100 cows, and 100 cows were in heat, and 80 of them were correctly identified in heat, and 20 were not. That would mean that we had an 80% sensitivity. And then when we're looking at specificity, let's say we have 100 cows that do not have mastitis, and 90 of those cows were correctly identified as not having mastitis, but 10 of them were identified as having mastitis, then we would have a 90% specificity. Now, you're probably asking, what is the sensitivity and specificity sweet spot? We don't know. It's basically what it comes down to. It's not going to be 100%. It's probably something in above 90 with our sensitivity and specificity. Would be great, but we don't know what it should be at. And so when we're thinking about heat detection and disease detection, they really matter for the different sensitivity or specificity. So sensitivity matters most for heat detection. And the reason why that is we have to catch those cows in heat. If we miss a cow in heat, we have to wait another 21 days before she comes back into heat. And that's a lot. When we're talking about specificity, it matters for disease detection. So let's talk about mastitis. If a cow does not have mastitis and the technology says that she does have mastitis and we go ahead and treat her, that is a lot of milk that we have to discard. Where if the cow does have mastitis and we don't pick that mastitis up, she's going to come back into the parlor 8 or 12 hours later, and we're most likely going to catch it then. And so it really, those differences matter for heat detection or disease detection. And so that's why it's really hard to know what our sweet spot is. So we're talking about on-farm application. We really need to think about the economics. Investment economics is really key. You saw about why producers had not invested in technologies, and that was because it all came down to economics. Systems that measure more than one variable are definitely ideal. We don't want a ton of technologies on the cow, but if we could have a technology that can measure things like rumination time, eating time, and lying time, that would be great. And if producers aren't using the information, then it's completely useless. And I talked a lot about heat detection today because heat detection is definitely the most researched. It's where we can see our economic investment the most quickly, but we still need a lot more research on disease detection. And when we're talking about on-farm application, teamwork makes the dream work, right? We need to all work together, the scientist, the engineer, the actual company, the producer, and the cow, to make a great technology. So do you think precision technologies are the future? I definitely think that they are, not just because I love them and study them, but really we live in a data generated world, right? More data has been generated in the last few years than in history. There's 1 billion people on Facebook every day, which is insane. And when we look at how many Google hits we get I think it's every second, there's like 40,000 Google hits around the world. So the amount of data that we are generating every day is insane. Also, precision technology changes the farmer's lifestyle. So, right, we originally relied on human senses to detect disease in estrus, but now we can use technologies to do a lot of that different work and allow the producer to have a little bit of a life. And then when we're talking about the cow and farmer interaction, the precision technology does not change the cow or the producer, it just changes how they interact. So now instead of a farmer going and checking on his cows in the morning, he or she will go straight to the computer and see if any cows come in heat in the night or if there's any cows. And so cow people still benefit the most from these technologies, because if a cow is alerted that she's sick, she's still sick. And the farmer then has to go see what's wrong with the cow and try to determine why she's sick. And cows are not going to become pregnant without breeding. And so the technologies are just going to alert the producer that, hey, she's in estrus, or yes, she's sick. But then that cow knowledge that the producer has is what's going to benefit him the most, him or her. And then the producer that can really harness a lot of that data and use it the most wisely is going to benefit a lot. So ideal technologies don't exist, right? I get that question all the time. What's the best technology? It really depends on the farm. Maybe one farm has a problem with heat detection and they need a technology for that. Maybe another farm has a problem with mastitis and they need a detection for that. So it really just depends on the farm. But an ideal technology is one that's cost effective, robust, explains a biological process, generates meaningful alerts, meaning don't tell me in 2 days that my cow is in heat, tell me today that my cow is in heat so I can breed her. It's simple to use and the information is readily available to producers. And when we're looking at robots, they really are the future. There's a lot of labor issues in the dairy industry, and so we need to get a handle on those, and one way is to use robots. And it also helps with the producer lifestyle, and a lot of people are realizing this. And so Fair Oaks Farms in Indiana is a very large farm. They're very open to the public, and so they actually installed DeLaval voluntary milking systems last year in one of their barns to try the robot lifestyle. All right, so thank you for listening today. If you have any questions, let me know.